Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our Connect Church Discipleship podcast. We're in season 5, episode 5. We're looking at our emotions and relationships this season and how that helps us in our spiritual formation. And we're in a series called Forgotten Emotions, as we just look at how we could practice some emotions that maybe we don't often give space to or know what to do with. And we're excited to have Angela back with us as we talk about celebration today. Angela, thank you for joining us.
Yep, excited to be here. Let's celebrate.
Let's celebrate. So last time we talked about this idea of practicing our emotions. What do we mean by that? What does it mean to practice our emotions?
Okay. I do think we live in a culture that has gotten really good at repressing a lot of these bigger emotions, bigger feelings. And I think practicing them just means that we're aware, we're making space to feel things. But I think the other side of it, especially as Christians, is inviting God into those spaces so that we're not just trying to fix these things in our own strength.
Yes.
Because I can come out of this process still very sad if I'm not inviting God in to walk it with me.
Absolutely. Great definition for us. So today we're talking about practicing celebration. And celebration, again, technically not an emotion, but there's good emotions associated with it, right? When we think about joy and gratitude, might be some emotions that we're not necessarily great at cultivating. And so practicing celebration will help us get to that point. I like to sometimes say that celebration is a spiritual discipline. Like if we do that, it's going to help us grow. So why are we not always good at celebration?
I think weirdly we can actually think that celebrating is selfish. Again, our world is hard, and I think taking the time to call out good things and appreciate them can just feel very countercultural. And sometimes when there's that rub, we don't do it just to avoid that rub.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are actually some of the benefits if we were to get better at practicing celebration?
I mean, to me, the top is just we get to see and remember the goodness of God. This pointing to ways that he's provided for us or blessed us, I genuinely believe it changes the posture of our heart. It just cultivates gratitude, and then that's there for the times when life is harder. We're able to recall that. And you don't have that recall if you haven't gone through the practice of remembering the good things.
Yeah. I think it speaks to our relationships too, right? Like sometimes our relationships could sometimes just be grape fests.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And again, like going back to the last episode, we said like we should do that, right? But like there's healthy measure in that, right? And so like, you know, if I'm never celebrating and I'm only lamenting, like that's a problem, right? And so practicing is going to help our relationships even have another depth to them, and model something of the joy of the Lord in our life. So what are some ways, practical ways, that we could actually celebrate a little more, right?
Okay.
And hopefully in turn we see more joy, more gratitude in our life.
I mean, I think it's easy to think that celebrations have to be big. And then since we can't meet those expectations, we don't do anything at all. But I think sometimes the small moments of inviting people into the high moments of life end up being more special than the big things that we pour time, money, all those things into. I always remember I had a cat that was getting old, and she was not supposed to make it, and then she did make it, and I invited my small groups. It was going to be a pool party no matter what, but we turned it into a quinceañera for my cat because she was still alive in her birthday, and they didn't know. They showed up with dessert, and somebody brought cat treats, and I was like, oh, they care about me. And it was just a weird little thing that was just very last minute. And we we wrote happy birthday puddles on the brownie that we were eating. But it ended up just being, again, we were going to have this small group party no matter what. Right. But I brought them into my life. They all pet my cat. And it was just a really nice little celebration, and it just worked out perfect. And another thing that I really love is the idea of looking for wins. Again, life is really, really, really hard. But when you start looking for things, you start seeing them. And what I love about this too is that even little kids can be brought into this exercise. I know sometimes parents will do this around the dinner table of either sometimes they'll frame it as high lows or they'll ask for the best part of their day. And there's going to be days when we have to dig a little deeper, but it gets our heart into a place where we're always looking for good. Sometimes it's going to be something smaller, but when we're looking for it, we're going to see it, and that's going to bring joy to our lives.
I love how all what you said there, just the word intentional comes to mind for me. Like we got to be really intentional about this. We've been actually doing high lows lately as a family, and we do high low, and then what can you praise Jesus for? And it's funny, they wanted my kids are young, they're 5 3, so they're like I want to do my high and low, and my daughter doesn't even know what a low is right now. She's her high and low are always the same.
I wanted today.
That's right. but it's just interesting to see what they say and how they say it, and like hopefully cultivating something in them in that. But it doesn't have to be this big expansive thing. Right?
No.
It's just like, hey, we're
And I
trying to
bet
make
you
time for it.
some days you're surprised by the things that they
Yes,
say is their
100%.
their high for the day. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And so um, it's just we gotta look for it. It
Yeah.
don't have to be this big crazy thing. So let me just read a scripture. Philippians chapter 4 verse 8. Paul writes, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." And so, like, what we dwell on is so important. And like, we tend to dwell on the opposite of those things, right? We tend to see only the negative. But when we fix our mind on Christ and the things of Christ, there's going to be a tangible effect to that. And so we need these regular reminders. But what would you say if someone says, "Yeah, but I feel phony doing that"?
Okay.
Like, you want me to give my high, and I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, it wasn't that great of a high, but I got to say something here today. You know, like, what do you do?
I mean, I know we like to hate on this phrase, but I think there is a little bit something to faking it till you make it. There's a little bit of truth there because if we're forcing ourselves to be diligent about looking for the good, I do think eventually it does help change us. Again, like you called celebration a discipline, and disciplines hurt. Disciplines they push us,
Yeah.
and so I think there's nothing phony about things that might feel uncomfortable as you're
Yeah,
doing.
absolutely. Good. So I like how when we look at scripture, God actually like built in celebration practices for them. Like, they would have these different festivals, and the festivals were often revolving around what God had done in the past.
Yeah.
Right. And we do this today with communion, right? We're actually told to celebrate communion. Why? Because we're celebrating what God has done in the past through Jesus' death and resurrection. And we probably need more annual and regular markers of like celebrating what the
I'm gonna
Lord has done.
throw you off your script a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
bit,
go
but
ahead.
I always love with Israel when they would stack the rocks
Mm-hmm.
so that every time they walked by,
Yes.
they would pass by and it would force them to stop and think about what God did in
Yeah,
that
yeah.
place.
What happened at that time,
Yes, and
right?
I love even like physical markers of
And,
things.
and we don't have like a lot of great ways to
No.
do that, right? You know, like, I'm like, what would it look like if, I don't know, yes, Jesus' death and resurrection, obviously we celebrate communion, but like, what about the times that God has come through for us? He's provided for us. Like, what, I don't know, maybe we just need to start having a meal every year on that same day with people, just to say, hey, I just want to remember today that 5 years ago today, God did this in my life and it was awesome, or whatever. I don't know, serve people in some way. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think like doing things like that, man, we need to recount those types of things. So that was a great connection with with the rocks. I love that. So I want to read what I like to call the party tithe. So can you read for us Deuteronomy chapter 14?
Be sure to set aside a tenth of all that your fields produce each year. Eat the tithe of your grain, new wine, and olive oil, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks in the presence of the Lord your God at the place he will choose as a dwelling for his name, so that you may learn to revere the Lord your God always. But if that place is too distant and you have been blessed by the Lord your God and cannot carry your tithe because the place where the Lord will choose to put his name is so far away, then exchange your tithe for silver and take the silver with you and go to the place the Lord your God will choose. Use the silver to buy whatever you like: cattle, sheep, wine, or other fermented drink, or anything you wish. Then you and your household shall eat there in the presence of the Lord your God and rejoice. And do not neglect the Levites living in your towns, for they have no allotment or inheritance of their own.
So we often think about tithing as giving money to the local church. There's an aspect of that. Go back to season 2 and you can learn all about tithing and all that. But I love that this is a tithe that they were, I call it the party tithe or the vacation tithe. Like, hey, make sure you set aside something so you could celebrate and just be joyous and have a good time. And that's healthy for us. Now, if that's the only thing we do, like, that's unhealthy, right? But like, are we actually, even with our finances? And again, it doesn't have to be a big thing, but in a small way, are we just saying like, hey, yeah, we're going to celebrate, we're going to be joyous? One last question for us. Why do you think we tend to run to grumbling and complaining instead of joy and gratitude and celebration?
I think grumbling is easier. Again, we keep coming back to that this is a, a discipline, and being diligent about discipline is an exercise. The same way I don't want to get on my exercise machine, we struggle with the exercise of focusing on gratitude of joy. But again, we're missing out because being joyful really makes a difference in how we perceive the world, how we go about the world. I, it sounds crazy, but being a joyful person is one of the most countercultural things that you can do. And I think it is actually a really cool way that you can point people to Jesus, because there are so many people that are so down, and when you are able to be obviously you have your days, but a relatively consistently joyful person, people see that
Yeah.
and people respond to that.
I love how you tie that pointing people to Jesus, right? Because again, the world is not doing that. So
No.
we have an opportunity here,
Yeah.
right, to really show something different. We want to
Yeah.
claim the way of Jesus is better. Okay, let's show that
Yeah.
to others. And a lot of times, I know I miss it. Very easy to run
Oh,
in
it's so
and complain.
easy. Yeah.
So,
Yep.
okay, very good. All right, so an interesting get to know you question here
Okay,
today.
let's go. What do you got for me?
So, what would you do if you came home and found a penguin in your freezer?
Well, I mean, for me personally, he would have some company because my freezer definitely has some dead bugs in it.
There you go.
So, I mean, hopefully, I would wonder how he got in there, but then I would just hope that he was making friends with all the dead bugs. So,
I love it. I love it. You're the only person that can answer that question.
no,
that way.
I have a really cool dead bug in there. Entomologists tend to pin their insects, but it takes work and time and energy, and I just don't really care. So instead, I just keep them dead in my freezer. Yeah.
Love it. Awesome. Well, on that note, celebrate all the insects in your life as well as the penguins, and make sure you find other things to celebrate to cultivate that joy and gratitude. Text your disciple, or maybe something that you want to celebrate together next time you get together with them, and come on back for our next episode in the series. Take care, everybody.